Earlier, I believed that the more love you showed, the more attention you gave, and the more you satisfied all her desires, the more the woman in your life would realize how lucky she was to have you. I don't think so anymore. Now, I believe all these things just make her take you for granted. They make her think there is nothing she can't do without you noticing or making excuses for her. Harper and I first crossed paths during our freshman year of college. We began dating, and throughout that first year, our relationship was quite on and off. Despite our mutual affection and the enjoyable intimacy we shared, neither of us felt ready for a committed relationship. Fast forward to halfway through our senior year, we reconnected, and this time we stayed together. 6 months after graduating, we tied the knot. The secret, son, is to tell them every day that you love them, to show them every day that you love them. Never let yourself get to the point where you take it for granted that they know this. Always show it. Show this every day of your marriage. It is so simple. I took his advice to heart, and for the next 7 years, I made sure to tell Harper I loved her every single day. I never missed a birthday, anniversary, or any other special occasion. I even kept track of minor anniversaries as excuses to give her cards, flowers, and other thoughtful gifts. I celebrated the first anniversary of her making meatloaf and using our new washer and dryer by sending her flowers. I gave her a card to commemorate her first promotion at work. No event was too insignificant for me to remember and celebrate. She received flowers and chocolates on the anniversary of our first time together, and diamond earrings to honor our first intimate moment. I sent flowers to our office just because, so she would receive a card in the middle of the workday that said, "I love you." I did everything I could think of to show her how much she meant to me. I followed my father's advice, using his relationship with my mother as an example. However, he didn't account for the fact that different women perceive the same actions differently. While my mother saw these gestures as a sign of her father's constant love, Harper viewed them as a sign of my insecurity and felt I was doing this to beg for her attention. Somehow, my attempts to express my love diminished me in her eyes. Unaware of this, I continued with my life, believing I had a happy and loving marriage. Harper and I thrived in our respective careers, steadily advancing up the corporate ladder. As we moved forward, the demands increased: more time, more energy, late nights, and occasional business trips. Some nights, we didn't even cross paths. I'd come home late to find Harper already asleep, or the other way around. I saw this as the cost of our success and assumed Harper felt the same. When we were together, I made every effort to make up for the time apart. The sex was incredible. There were weekends when we didn't even bother to get dressed. Harper would smile and say, "I'm yours forever." And I, naturally, believed her. I discovered this at her company's Christmas party, which was held at a hotel in the city center. They rented a ballroom and several rooms to serve as guest suites. The party was scheduled for a Wednesday night, and I had told Harper I would meet her there. Although the event started at 7, I had an out-of-town client to put on an 8 o'clock flight, so I informed Harper not to expect me until around 8:30. However, at the last minute, the client decided to stay an extra day to explore the city, allowing me to arrive at the party by 7:30. I walked into the ballroom just in time to see Harper with a man I didn't recognize. Back then, I didn't know most of the people she worked with, having only seen them at picnics and Christmas parties. What I found strange was that Harper wrapped her arms around his waist. I headed towards the corridor they had entered, and upon entering it, I found that it was a kind of vestibule from which 3 rooms branched off. I wondered which room they went into, so I tried the one closest to me and found it empty, as was the room next to it. I was just about to close the door and enter the 3rd room when I heard giggling. It seemed to be coming from within the room, even though it appeared empty. Curious, I went back inside for a closer look. Another chuckle echoed, and I realized it was emanating from the ceiling vent. It dawned on me that I could hear what was happening in the adjacent room. As I moved towards the door to enter the next room, I heard Harper say, "Be careful, you don't want to tear your dress, do you? So how the hell am I supposed to get to your charms? Here, let me show you." "No, lover, only after you get my toy. You can't play with my charms until I can play with your toy." The sound of a zipper being pulled up filled the air. Harper then remarked, "Now there's something I'll never get tired of. Are you sure we don't have time to run into one of the rooms for a quickie? I need you, very, very necessary." "Well, you'll have to. Bob said he would be here around 8:30, and I should be here when he arrives. If he comes early and I walk in with a just had sex look on my face, he might get suspicious and start checking me out, and we don't want that." "I know, love. I can just tell him to go home and we'll talk about it when I get there. Then I can convince him that we were just joking and trying to prank him, and he'll believe me. But just because I know I can doesn't mean I want to open that particular can of worms. Are you sure we can't quickly run upstairs? I don't want to risk it, my love, but I can relieve your stress, she said. There was a pause, followed by the man's groan. God, Harper, you are so good at this. Your mouth is pure magic. I've never been treated so well before. The moaning persisted for a minute or two, eventually reaching a peak. Bryce will be very angry when I tell him that you relieve my stress, and he will have to wait until tomorrow, maybe not. How can you do this? Bryce will probably arrive only after your husband. What you and I just didn't take long, baby. I'll introduce you to Bob, and then I'll excuse myself to go to the ladies' room. While you and Bob are chatting, I'll slip in here with Bryce to give him some quick relief. God, Harper, you're just a depraved woman, he said. I'm no lover. That's why you like me, she replied with a smirk. Are you going to rinse your mouth or kiss your hubby with my taste on your tongue? He hesitated for a moment before responding. This won't be the first time he tastes you. You are a devil, Harker. That's what you are, evil and vicious. Come on, love, we need to get back to the party. It's astounding how swiftly love can perish. I transitioned from boundless affection to utter loathing in mere moments. Throughout this ordeal, I wrestled with my thoughts. Should I break down the door and unleash my fury, or should I bide my time and use this newfound knowledge to strategize? Should I act impulsively or wait to gather names, dates, and places? If I confront them now, it will devolve into a he said, she said scenario in divorce court. I could claim I overheard, but she would likely deny it vehemently. I required more evidence. Besides, if I had broken down the door, I might never have discovered who Bryce was, or if there were other men involved besides Bryce and the guy in the next room with Harker. No, I would still have my chance to exact revenge, but it wouldn't be that night. I rushed out of the building and into the car, waiting until the moment I told Harker to wait for me. Upon entering the ballroom, I spotted Harper seated at a table with two couples and one man. Harper stands at 173 centimeters, and the man beside her was roughly 10 centimeters taller. Assuming he didn't have unusually short legs, I estimated him to be around 183 centimeters tall. His black wavy hair and thin, crayon-like mustache made it clear he was quite handsome, even from a distance. Harper saw me approaching, stood up, and stepped back from the table. She opened her arms to embrace me and moved to kiss me with her wicked mouth. At the last second, I turned my head and accepted the kiss on my cheek, noticing the surprise on her face. I think I'm sick with something, honey. I don't want to pass it on to you. She agreed and then introduced me to the people at the table. The handsome fellow was named Zane, and when he stood up to shake my hand, I saw that I was close in my guesses. My height is 183 centimeters, and we were approximately at each other's eye level. This was only important because I wanted to know his reach when I went after him. We took our seats, and I began conversing with my wife's colleagues. It seemed like the two couples were a bit on edge, almost as if they were anticipating something. While I was making up numbers with Harper, she leaned in and whispered in my ear, "This thing that made you sick won't stop you from jumping on my bones today. I've been horny as hell all day just thinking about you." Yes, I have no doubt. That's what I thought. I wanted to respond with, "No, Harper, I don't think so," but I held back. Unlike Zane, I had never addressed her as Harper, and I wasn't prepared to do anything that might startle her just yet. So instead, I said, "We'll just have to wait and see how things go and how I feel when we get home." Harper was unaware of it, but she would never be intimate with me again. When the music ended and we headed back to the table, there was another man sitting there, chatting with Zane. Harper introduced me to him as Bryce. He stood about 1.83 meters tall and weighed around 82 kilograms. His soft hands and weak chin were details I noted. Roughly 10 minutes later, Bryce got up to visit people at another table, and I kept an eye on him. I wasn't surprised when I saw him slip into the hallway that led to the room where Harper and Zane already were. It seemed Zane had arranged it while Harper and I were dancing. After a couple of minutes, Harper stood up, kissed me on the cheek, and said, "I'm going to the restroom." Zane waited until she was a few feet away from the table before asking, "What do you think about the Broncos' chances at the Super Bowl?" Apparently, Harper had mentioned to him that I was an avid football fan, and he planned to use that to keep me occupied while Harper sneaked off to Bryce's. As I discussed football with Zane, I kept an eye on the door through which Bryce had exited. Less than a minute later, Harper entered it. Nearly 15 minutes went by before Harper came back to the table. I kept chatting with Zane, acting as if I hadn't noticed how long she had been gone. Once she returned, I danced with her again, and she snuggled up to me. "I'm horny, baby, very, very horny. Please don't let me down tonight." When we got back to the table, Bryce asked Harper to dance. As they moved onto the floor, I noticed a smirk on the face of one of the women at the table, directed at me. The old cliche came to mind: the husband will be the last to know about this. Bryce brought her back, then Zane brought her out, and I noticed the two women at the table exchanging knowing smiles. I tucked the observation away in my memory. If this was common knowledge among her colleagues, uncovering what I needed would be straightforward. Harper danced with a few of her superiors and then spent 15 minutes talking at her boss's desk. When she returned to our table, she whispered, "Okay, lover, they saw me, and I danced with those with whom I was supposed to dance. Let's go home, lover. Be ready for me, I really need it." We were in separate cars, and I gave her a generous head start. I wanted her to be home, undressed, and on the bed by the time I arrived. This way she could fully experience what I had planned. I drove slowly to ensure she had enough time to become exactly what I desired. When I got home, I rushed upstairs and hurried into the master bedroom, heading straight to the closet where I pretended to have a bowel movement. I stayed in the toilet making noises for a few minutes, then went to the sink, flushed the water, and wiped my forehead with a wet rag. After drying my face with a towel, I walked into the bedroom and saw Harper lying naked on the bed. "Sorry, baby. I don't know what it is, but I'm not gonna give it to you. I'll sleep in the spare bedroom tonight and call the doctor in the morning." As I exited the room, I noticed she was angry. This morning, I was up before Harper and seated at the kitchen table, sipping coffee and attempting to look stick when she entered the kitchen. "Do you feel better?" she asked. "Not good. I hardly slept." I glanced at my watch. The doctor's office wouldn't open until 8:30. I'd better call work and let them know that I won't be there today. I reached for the phone as she poured herself a cup of coffee and then went to get ready for work. "Remember, I'll be late today," she reminded. "We're still working on that damn budget proposal, and it should be ready by next Tuesday." "Yeah, sure," I thought, ending the call without responding. After Harper left for work, I got dressed, went to my office, and tidied up the tasks I couldn't leave unattended. I informed my secretary that I had a doctor's appointment and would be gone for the rest of the day. Leaving the office, I headed to the public library. There, I sifted through the directories and soon located the addresses and telephone numbers of Zane Bragg and Bryce Treville. Using the library computers, I gathered information about the company Harper worked for, including the names, addresses, and telephone numbers of all company officers and board members. I also checked the backgrounds of senior officials and the chairman of the board to gauge their potential reactions to a scandal. I was pleased with what I found. If my assumptions were correct, even the slightest hint of scandal would compel Harper and her two fellow lovers to discard everything. That evening, I parked near Harper's workplace. When she got out at 10 minutes past 4, I followed her as she drove across town. She pulled into the motel parking lot, got out of the car, and walked up to room 131. She knocked. The door opened. Bryce stepped aside and let her in. 20 minutes later, Zane arrived, got out of the car, and walked towards room 131. I could only assume he was there too to attend the budget meeting. I wondered if Harper's company valued the fact that their employees worked on the budget on their own time and at their own expense. I could be wrong. One of them could have submitted an expense report for the meeting. Yes, exactly. I noted the make, model, and license plate of Zane's car before heading home. As I drove, I pondered everything I had discovered about Zane and Bryce. Both were married, but I couldn't determine if their marriages were happy. What I did know was that neither of them had attended the office party. I needed to uncover more about them and possibly involve them in my scheme to expose Harper, Zane, and Bryce. I also reflected on a few details that had previously escaped my attention. For instance, Harper consistently worked late on Mondays and Thursdays. I never questioned her explanation that Mondays were exhausting due to resolving weekend issues. Thursdays demanded extra hours because they had to complete all the reports due on Friday. Why did I trust her? I was foolishly in love with her. Only now do I understand how foolish I was. I was lying in bed reading when I heard her come home. I turned off the light, set the book aside, and pretended to be asleep. She opened the door, glanced in, then closed it and went to her bedroom. A few minutes later, I heard the shower running. That night, I found sleep elusive. Staring at the ceiling, I pondered how I could eliminate all three of them simultaneously. It had to be done in one fell swoop. I couldn't risk one discovering the fate of the others and taking precautions. Once it was over, I'd reveal my identity to them. And with that revelation, they'd understand the reason behind it. Then it dawned on me. I sat down, turned on the light, and picked up the book I was reading. It was a mystery about the murder of a man who was framed. He was convicted based on planted evidence, and a lawyer and private detective were frantically trying to prove his innocence before he was executed. This will be enough, I thought, putting the book down and turning off the light. Now that I knew what to do, I fell asleep and slept like a baby. On Friday morning, I informed Harper that the doctor had diagnosed me with stomach flu and that, with medication, it should clear up. I mentioned that I was still feeling a bit weak, but the doctor assured me I'd be strong enough to return to work by Monday. He advised me to do nothing but relax over the weekend. Harper touched my cheek. "Rest and gain strength, my love. You will need it." I was left out and will need to make up for everything. With that, she headed off to work. After getting dressed, I left the house to continue my research. By the end of the day, I discovered that Zane's wife worked as a lawyer's secretary and had missed the party because she was out of town visiting her sick mother. Bryce's wife, on the other hand, was in real estate and had been absent from the party due to her efforts to close a $2 million deal. Both marriages appeared stable, likely because neither woman was aware of their husband's activities. I will fix this, and very soon. After a relaxing weekend at home, I told Harper, I feel ready to go to work on Monday. Though still a bit weak, I reassured myself that I'd be fine as long as I didn't overexert. On Monday night, I picked Harper up at the same motel again, but this time it was room 146. Zane met her at the door and let her inside. 5 minutes later, Bryce arrived and entered the room. I noted down information about Bryce's car before driving home. My plan carried a certain amount of risk for me. The willingness to take that risk demonstrated just how strongly I desired revenge. It was costly, but if it achieved my goal, it would be the best money I had ever spent. Through a series of phone calls to friends who had connections, I managed to get in touch with the right person. A midnight meeting in a parking lot secured what I needed. By the next Sunday, I was prepared, and when Harper went to work on Monday morning, the decision was final. That evening, I trailed Harper back to the motel. Once she and her two lovers were inside room 136, I exited my car and approached Zane's vehicle. Finding it unlocked, I opened the trunk and stashed half a pound of marijuana behind the spare tire. Bryce's car, however, was locked. Utilizing the Slim Jimmy I had purchased from Snap-on, I managed to break into it. After opening the trunk, I placed a pound of weed inside, then locked the car, leaving an ounce of weed on the back bumper to provide the police with probable cause for a search. I drove half a block, called the police from a payphone, and reported a drug purchase happening in motel room 136, providing the license plates of Harper, Zane, and Bryce. When they asked for my name, I quickly replied, "No way, man, I'm not going to expose myself to a bunch of Colombians," and hung up. I then drove to another payphone and called all 3 local TV stations, giving them the same information I had given the cops. The election had just passed, and the new mayor had campaigned on a war on drugs, so I knew the police would respond quickly. The television stations were aware of this too, and they would head there to film the story. I drove another block to the 3rd payphone and called Zane and Bryce's wives. "Your husbands are in room 136 at the Seabreeze Motel with a woman," I informed them. After that, I drove back and parked off to the side of the road where I could watch without drawing any attention. The police arrived in just 10 minutes, but it took an additional half hour to get everything organized. Initially, a couple of patrol cars appeared, followed by a SWAT van, and then 2 unmarked cars carrying plainclothes detectives. By the time the police were prepared, news reporters had already reached the scene and television vans were in place. I observed as 2 SWAT officers used a battering ram to break down the motel room door, allowing 4 other SWAT officers to enter with their guns drawn. God, I wish I could be a fly on the wall to see Harper's face when the door collapses. 3 minutes later, Harper, Bryce, and Zane were escorted out of the room in handcuffs. Bryce and Zane were in shorts, but Harper was naked, with a blanket draped over her shoulders. I used the preset button on my cell phone to call the president of Harper's company. When he picked up, I informed him, "Did you know that 3 of your middle managers are running the drug trade out of your corporate office?" I revealed their identities and explained what was happening in Seabreeze, even while we were conversing. After making identical calls to all 5 board members, I drove home. When the cops searched Zane and Bryce's cars, they discovered planted weed and an ounce of cocaine in Harper's purse. Beneath the front seat of her car, they would have found another 4 ounces. I wasn't sure what Zane and Bryce's wives looked like, so I couldn't tell if they were among the gathered crowd, but I really hoped they were there. This story aired on the 10 o'clock news on channels 2 and 7. I couldn't help but laugh when the Channel 7 presenter announced, "Today Mayor Jones began making good on his campaign promise." Police took down a large drug ring operating out of one of the city's motels. There is no news yet on how many were seized. Footage of 3 arrested drug lords was shown, and we were called upon. Follow the latest news. After that, I turned off the TV, switched off my phone, and went to bed. I laughed when Harper asked me to mortgage the house so she could bail. She eventually convinced her parents to put up the money. When she got out of jail and came back home, she discovered all the locks had been changed and her belongings were stacked in boxes in the driveway. "Why are you doing this to me?" she asked. "Because you are a fallen woman and I don't want anything to do with you anymore." "But you don't understand. If you would just let me explain." "I've had all the explanation I needed when I saw you being escorted out of a motel room making on the news," I said, and shut the door in her face. I assisted her father in loading all her belongings into the U-Haul, but I avoided discussing his daughter with him. Harper called me 2 or 3 times a day, but I never answered. When she appeared at my office one day, I requested security to escort her out of the building. As it turned out, she, Bryce, and Zane were laid off from their company, and all 3 struggled with their legal issues. Despite being first-time offenders, they did not receive the probation that many others in their situation typically get, largely due to the mayor's firm anti-drug stance. Their insistence on protesting their innocence, even when caught with the goods, did not help their case. Harper particularly hurt her own situation by demanding a blood test to prove she was drug-free. The test came back clean, which prosecutors used to argue that the drugs found in her purse and car were meant for sale, not personal use. Because the mayor wanted to demonstrate immediate results from his war on drugs, the 3 were offered a deal: 1 year in prison and 2,000 hours of community service. If they exhibited good behavior, they could be released after 9 months. Their lawyer warned them they would be fried, so they agreed to the deal. While Harper was incarcerated, I filed for divorce, as did Zane's wife and Bryce's wife. All 3 served their time, and once they were released, I kept a close watch on them. When the moment was right, I visited Bryce. I found out later that he had 3 broken ribs and a broken arm when he was admitted to the hospital emergency room. He could have pressed charges against me, I suppose, but he chose not to. Perhaps he felt guilty for what he had done. Zane and Harper lived together, and one evening I caught them leaving the bar. After I finished with Zane, I turned to Harper and said, "Not bad for a weakling, huh?" "Harper, remember the Christmas party where you pleasured Zane in that little back room? Do you remember what he said? If he's as weak as you say, then we can get away with it right in front of him and get away with it. Remember, Harper?" I saw her face change as everything fell into place, and I laughed. "That's right, Harper. This weakling took revenge for your betrayal. Better call an ambulance for your boyfriend. He doesn't look that hot." She was still looking at me as I got into the car and drove away.